He built one of the biggest television franchises on the planet. He turned three grumpy men talking about cars into a global phenomenon worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And then, at the peak of his relevance, he walked away. Not because he was forced to, but because he refused to review the one thing the entire car industry was betting its future on. This is the story of Jeremy Clarkson, and why his exit from television might say more about the state of the car industry than about the man himself. Before the private jets, before the destroyed Land Rovers, before the world watched him drive a Reliant Robin off a ramp, Jeremy Clarkson was just another local journalist trying to make a name for himself. He didn't start in television. He started in print, reviewing cars for local newspapers in the north of England. No cameras, no studio audience, no global reach. Just a man, a notepad, and an opinion nobody had asked for yet. But that opinion, blunt, sarcastic, unapologetic, was exactly what motoring journalism at the time didn't have. Car reviews in that era were polite, technical, safe. Clarkson was none of those things, and that difference is what eventually got him noticed. By the 1980s, that voice landed him a spot on a small BBC motoring show most people don't even remember existed in its original form, Top Gear. It wasn't the Top Gear the world would come to know. It was modest, regional, a far cry from what it would become. But it was the foundation, the first crack in the door that would eventually lead to one of the most watched television formats in human history. Here's what most casual viewers don't know. Top Gear failed first. The original format was axed, canceled, done. By most standards, that should have been the end of the story. A promising presenter, a show that didn't work, a quiet fade into obscurity like hundreds of other British TV formats before it. But in 2002, something changed. Jeremy Clarkson, by now a chipping Norton local, a farmer as much as a broadcaster, teamed up with producer Andy Willman to bring Top Gear back from the dead. Not as a reboot, as a complete reinvention. Gone was the polite, informative motoring show format. In its place, chaos, comedy, ego, and a complete disregard for the rulebook of factual television. This wasn't a show about cars anymore. It was a show about three men who happened to be talking about cars while destroying friendships, budgets, and occasionally entire vehicles on camera. That's when Richard Hammond and James May entered the picture, completing a trio that would become one of the most recognizable on-screen dynamics in broadcasting history. The chemistry wasn't manufactured. It couldn't have been. You cannot script 3 decades of genuine friction, banter, and mutual exasperation that somehow reads as brotherhood. That authenticity is precisely why audiences in over 200 territories tuned in, because it didn't feel like a car show. It felt like eavesdropping on your most chaotic friends. What Clarkson, Hammond, and May built wasn't just a show. It was an empire. Top Gear became the most watched factual television program on the planet, according to Guinness World Records at its peak. It spawned international format licenses, live arena tours, merchandise, spin-off specials, and a viewership so massive that BBC executives had to treat it less like a TV program and more like a national export. And when the trio's relationship with the BBC eventually fractured, following a widely publicized incident involving Clarkson and a Top Gear producer, the story could have ended there too. It didn't. Amazon swooped in with a reported deal worth well over £160 million, and the Grand Tour was born. Same format, same 3 men, same chaos, different network, different budget, different rules. This is the part of Clarkson's story that automation-era content creators should pay the closest attention to. The show's success was never really about cars. It was about 3 distinct, well-defined personalities placed inside a format flexible enough to let their conflict generate the content itself. The car was the excuse. The friction was the product. In 2024, Jeremy Clarkson stepped away from the Grand Tour, closing the book on a TV motoring journalism career spanning nearly 4 decades. But the way he framed his exit is where this story gets genuinely interesting, and where it stops being just a nostalgia piece. Clarkson has been open about his lack of interest in reviewing electric vehicles, which now make up a rapidly growing share of the global car market. As EVs became less of a novelty and more of an industry default, the format that made Clarkson famous, visceral, emotional, engine-driven storytelling, started to clash with where the automotive world was actually heading. Think about what that really means. For 40 years, Clarkson's entire value proposition was built around sound, feel, drama, mechanical theater, a screaming V8, a gearbox that fights back, a car that can kill you if you're not paying attention. That's the raw material his career was built on. Electric vehicles, by design, remove almost all of that. Silent acceleration, no gears to crunch, no engine note to obsess over. For a broadcaster whose entire brand was built on mechanical drama, the EV transition wasn't just a new category to review. It was, in many ways, an existential threat to the format itself. So when Clarkson said he wasn't interested in reviewing electric cars, he wasn't just expressing a personal preference. He was drawing a line under an entire era of motoring content, the era where cars were loud, dangerous, and full of personality, right as that era was ending anyway. Here's the bigger picture most coverage of this story misses. Clarkson's exit isn't really about one man retiring from television. It's a marker, a visible, headline-grabbing signal of a much larger shift happening across the entire automotive media landscape. The formats that dominated motoring content for decades, engine sound, top-speed runs, drag races, drift battles, were built for a category of vehicle that is slowly being phased out of relevance in major markets. As EV adoption accelerates, the entire content genre that made people like Clarkson famous has to evolve or die with it. That leaves a vacuum, and vacuums, particularly in content, don't stay empty for long. The question this story really raises isn't what's next for Jeremy Clarkson. It's who fills the space he's leaving behind, and do they build a new format for a new era, or do they just try to replicate the old one with quieter cars? Jeremy Clarkson didn't just present a car show for 40 years. He defined what car entertainment looked like for an entire generation.